The President. Members will please remain standing while the Chief Executive enters the chamber. The Chief Executive. The Chief Executive will first address the Council. Mr. President, honourable members, good afternoon. Before I take questions from members, I would like to share with you my views on constitutional development and the property market. With the government's publication of the electoral package for 2012 in mid-April, democratic development in Hong Kong has entered a critical stage. The debate on the political system in the past 2 decades has indeed led to a considerable degree of social division and infighting. We must break out of skepticism and mutual distrust. To do so, we must no longer focus only on short-term and personal gain or otherwise. It is time for us to make practical and solid effort in the spirit of mutual understanding and accommodation as well as the public good. Step by step, we could build the basis for mutual trust and arrive finally at our common destination of universal suffrage. History tells us that constitutional development is always an arduous and complex political task. The process and the outcome are equally important. As far as Hong Kong's constitutional development is concerned, issues at the constitutional level alone are already exceedingly complex. The Legislative Council, Hong Kong SAR government, and the central authorities all have either decision or veto power. To achieve results, the cooperation of all 3 sides is essential. In 2005, the public at large, the central authorities, and the Hong Kong SARG were all prepared to take the first step forward. But at the end, 2/3 majority support of the LegCo could not be secured, and the political system stood still. In the 5 years that followed, a significant change came about in that the central authorities set a definite timetable for universal suffrage. The central authorities took the most momentous and admirable step forward. What remains now is whether all parties in Hong Kong are able to compromise and set aside all their doubts, distrusts, and the emotions built up over the years. What remains now is if all parties will take a sensible step forward in response. During the consultation period, some political parties, LegCo members, and members of the public expressed the wish for the central authorities to affirm once again its 2007 pledge on the universal suffrage timetable. Deputy Secretary General Qiao Xiaoyang responded to this wish and spoke on the same day of the publication of the Hong Kong SARG proposal. He reaffirmed the 2007 pledge and expressed his wish to work together with all sectors in Hong Kong in realizing the goal of universal suffrage for the 2017 Chief Executive 2020 LegCo election. The people of Hong Kong can see that the central authorities have taken yet another step. That's why a number of opinion polls tell us that there are far more people in support of the 2012 package than there are against. We must appreciate that the political system in Hong Kong is still evolving. Our political conventions are not yet established. To resolve political differences, we have yet to build a body of constitutional rules and conventions. We may have lofty goals in our pursuit for democracy, but if it cannot be achieved overnight, then we must keep our feet and move closer and closer until we reach our ultimate goal. I believe that is the right attitude in the face of reality. It is also the right attitude for us to stay positive and act responsibly towards Hong Kong. If we stay locked in arguments and are unwilling to build consensus, then how could we overcome the obstacles and strive for universal suffrage step by step? Even if universal suffrage were before us, how could we develop our democratic political system for its benefits to be reaped? Honourable members, your support for the passage of the government's package would not stand in the way of your pursuit for your lofty goals. Neither would it stand in the way of the realization of your goals. What is more important is that your support for the package reflects the majority wish of the people. Compared to the current electoral methods, the 2012 package is in fact more progressive and democratic. It is a step forward towards our goal for universal suffrage in 2017 and 2020. The 2012 package is not in conflict with your fight over the electoral details and for a more democratic LegCo election in 2016. If the 2012 package is passed, mutual trust among the central authorities, Hong Kong SARG, LegCo, and the people of Hong Kong would certainly be enhanced. There is everything to gain and nothing to lose. We must set aside our preconceived ideas and the bickering. The central authorities has demonstrated their sincerity. It is now for us to make positive achievements. Some say that if the constitution reform should fail again this time, the biggest loser will be Hong Kong. It would be distressing to see the stalemate in Hong Kong's democratic development. Once again, the democratic process of Hong Kong is hovering between hope and letdown. The making of history is hinged on a thought you have and a step you take. I most solemnly and earnestly appeal to members once again to support the government's 2012 electoral package for the sake of Hong Kong's democratic campaign and for the sake of Hong Kong as a whole. Now I would like to turn to the property market. The property market has become a hot topic in town recently. The reason is because property prices have gone up by about 1/3 between January last year and March this year. Some developments were set to be offered at sky-high prices. It smacks of rife speculation. The government is aware that many people are finding it difficult to buy a home. Members of the community hope to have their own havens. Even if it's just a small place, it gives them space. That we fully understand. There are 3 factors leading to the upsurge in property prices. Firstly, mortgage interest rate is exceedingly low. Secondly, there is an influx of foreign capital into our capital market, in our property market. Thirdly, supply of new housing units is on the low side. The first 2 factors are a reflection of the global market trend and are beyond Hong Kong's control. These 2 factors may reverse any time with changing external market conditions. On the supply of new units, the government is pressing ahead with our work. The housing policy of the government is to follow market demands and respond through land supply. At the core of it, we have the application list system supplemented by flexible enhancement measures. Supply is also augmented through irregular land auctions. During the debate on the budget, the Financial Secretary has already expounded on this point to LegCo. We will continue to monitor the price movements and sales practices of private developments, particularly the small to medium-sized units. As necessary, we will take timely measures to relieve the public of their concerns. Recently, there is a view that apart from revitalizing the secondary home ownership scheme market, the government should resume the HOS program. There are different views on this matter, not just among the government, but it's not just the government that has a different view on the matter. Some in the community may also see this differently. In an article recently published, the Secretary, Mrs. Eva Zhang, has already spelled out in detail the issues that need to be considered. I must stress today that the government is fully aware that there is a group of people in the community whose income or asset exceeds the eligibility criteria for public housing, but who do not feel they could afford to buy a home though they wish to. I fully appreciate the urgency of the matter. I understand too that there is a need to forge consensus in the community on the important subject of government subsidizing home buyers. Therefore, in the next 5 months, Secretary Eva Zhang will be consulting various stakeholders and the public to gauge their views on this issue. If after extensive consultation the government has a further idea on the matter, I will give an account in my policy address in October. Thank you, Mr. President. The Chief Executive will now take questions from members. After the Chief Executive has answered the question put a member, the member may forthwith ask a short supplementary question. Dr. Raymond Ho.
Thank you, Mr. President. If I may ask the Chief Executive this question. On the mainland, as far as environmental protection efforts are concerned, they have been very positive and active. At the December Copenhagen conference on climate change, a number of popular measures have been promoted. I would like to ask this question. Among the many initiatives and measures proposed by the community, I understand that they will not be acceptable unless we meet the national standards. And in fact, the national government also encourages the use of renewable energy. And they can become connected with the grid network. But then in Hong Kong, we can't do the same because this will be done at the expense of the power companies. I just wondered if we can follow the mainland model so that more renewable energy can be used and we can enhance the proportion of renewable energy. In fact, in 2020, 15% of the power supply should be from the source of renewable energy. Currently in Hong Kong, the same is only 1 to 3%. Can you tell us more measures so as to result in an improvement in this regard? In relation to greenhouse gas emission and ways to improve the air quality of Hong Kong, I think this is our common goal. In Hong Kong, we have already done a lot in this regard. As far as the power companies are concerned, in relation to the mix of energy, most of the time we are using coal-fired power supply, and we understand that by 2020, China will see to it that there will be a reduction of the emission of CO2 by 45%. We support this, and in fact, as far as we are concerned, for the coal-fired power plants, they will be switched over to the use of natural gas. And in this way, we can have the conversion. I'm sure the proportion of energy or power coming from coal-fired generation will be reduced. But then, of course, we have to take into account our geographical position. Solar energy, wind power, as well as hydro power will not be easy to come by. However, we'll make use of advances in technology. We'll make greater use of renewable energy to supply the power to Hong Kong. So it isn't just a matter of whether we have the will. We, of course, decide to do so, but then we can't forget the technological constraints. Moreover, you raised the question as to whether the renewable energy produced can be connected with the grid. I think it's a matter of the technical feasibility. And of course, I've referred to wave energy, solar energy, and wind power. I think we'll try to move on to such areas gradually. But we've been told that we don't have a huge expense of desert to give us other types of energy. But I'm sure with the advances in technology, they may become more feasible. What I want to say is that for the national standards being laid down, and as far as the national pledges given, in particular in relation to the emission of CO2, will certainly follow suit, and we have the determination to do likewise. Dr. Raymond Ho. If I may just supplement to my earlier question, I'm glad to hear from the CE that he is going to follow the model of the national government, say, for example, the development of a low-carbon economy. I just wondered if departments can do some coordinating work to advance the cause. Say, for example, in the mainland, many buildings have already abandoned the use of curtain walls. In fact, they are switching over to the use of solar energies. They have solar panels on the rooftop, and many others are also using wind power. I don't think they don't matter much. In fact, the aggregate effect will be huge. So I think departments must help in order to see further promotion in this regard. For the former Kai Tak site and for other newly developed areas, we're moving in the same direction. We would like to see a green environment. Mr. Andrew Chang. Chief Executive, come next Sunday, we'll have the by-elections. When we look at the publicity drive of the administration, we have seen something opposite to the convention. We don't see too many conspicuous banners. In your advertisements, there is no appeal to the electors to vote. It is rumored that you are not going to go to the ballot box. You have said that the political development has to be rolled forward. But if you dare not go to the polling station, you are not going to the ballot box, how can you convince us that we can have trust in you so that you will fight for genuine universal suffrage for Hong Kong? In your opening remarks, you talked about the political development. No one would disagree with you. We must all have our feet firmly on the ground. But then within the administration, do you have the determination? Do you have the commitment to see through the reform? Now, for the most basic thing about democracy, namely voting in an election, you're not going to take part. But then you've been saying that you would like to play hard. I just want to know what's the subject matter of that statement. Chief Executive, in relation to the fight for universal suffrage, all along I've been determined, and I will do my utmost to achieve the target. Since my election as the Chief Executive, up to now, I have been doing the same, and I will do so until the end of my term. Mr. Andrew Cheng, Mr. President, I think you will find the CE's answer very brief. Please raise your question. My question was, now the CE, in relation to the by-elections, and irrespective of your idea about the motive of the by-elections, it is still, after all, elections under the constitutional framework of Hong Kong. We need to roll forward democracy. And I think the government's duty is to encourage the turnout rate. So my question is, come next Sunday, usually we also always have a photo call at the ballot box for seeing the CE casting his vote. Are we going to get the same next Sunday? Whenever I have the right to vote, I have taken part in legislative elections. But for this by-election, it is very special. 5 incumbent legislative councillors resigned suddenly. And then we arranged for by-elections, and they have stood for candidacy. So in both the Legislative Council as well as the community at large, there are views that such by-elections are not necessary. People are saying that this is abuse of the procedures, it is a waste of public money. So I have to be very careful when I consider whether to vote or not. I haven't made up my mind. If I have made up my mind not to vote or otherwise, I will certainly give an account to the public.
Mr. Chen Kam-lam. Thank you, Mr. President. Chief Executive, in recent years, property prices have soared, as you mentioned just now, Chief Executive. As we know, if property prices stay at a high level persistently, that would add to the burden of people trying to buy a home. And it won't bode well for our economic development, because businesses, big or small, have to pay rent, and this will become a heavy burden on them. And so that will be a negative impact on our competitiveness. Just now the Chief Executive told us that there will be consultation in the next 5 months. In the past 2 years, property prices have gone up by more than 30%. So my question is, Chief Executive, do you see that there is any need or possibility of changing the current policy while you conduct the 5-month consultation? Do you think the 9 measures recently announced are adequate, or are they not yet adequate? Chief Executive, well, we believe what's happened is unusual. That's why we have taken steps on 2 fronts. On the one hand, we are taking steps to deal with the irregular sales practices. This is to ensure transparency and fairness in sales practices. So first made the announcement in November last year, and things followed, as you know. On the other front, we're going to increase supply. As the Chief Financial Secretary has informed you, we are going to complete another 50,000 units in the next few years. The housing authorities also rolled out several thousand units, and recently there's been successful activation of the application list. I'm sure all these developments would help. We must bear in mind that property is always a sensitive people's livelihood issue, especially in 1997 and in 2000, the property bubble burst. People suffered immensely. Now, it is the duty of the government to ensure everyone has a roof over his head, but is it necessary for the government to help people to invest in properties in their homes? If we are to do it, where do we draw the line? Now, you might recall last time when we had the Asian financial turmoil, when the bubble bursted, people condemned the government for encouraging them to buy their homes, and then their property became negative assets. So do we want to see that? I think we ought to debate these issues. We keep an open mind. That's why Mrs. Eva Jiang is going to consult you and others on the issue. We have to think this matter carefully through. Now, land already earmarked for public housing, should we want it to turn it into land for subsidized private housing? That's something we have to consider carefully, because there may be a long waiting time for public housing units, so we don't want to see that happen. That's why all these matters ought to be considered in greater depth. It won't take long, it's just 5 months. I hope I'll be able to give you a full account in my policy address. Mr. Chen Kem-lam. Mr. President, I agree the government ought to do the consultation, because the measures taken by the government have seen certain effect. But I'd just like the CE to consider further. Perhaps there are two things you need to do in the light of the current property market. Apart from increasing supply, is also a question of suppressing speculation. Now, measures have been taken recently to rectify the so-called irregular sales practices, but on other aspects, I hope you will also do something more. Perhaps you could roll out measures sooner, because otherwise, if we wait another 5 months, the problem remains. And after the delivery of the policy address, we may still need more time to see the measures work, and it will be more difficult to address the problem. So do you agree? I agree. The Financial Secretary has already announced in the budget to increase stamp duty for certain property transactions, and that's helped to suppress speculation. And you can see from the transaction volume that this is working. And you must understand a point. When it comes to suppressing property prices and ruining the property market, the government can do a lot, so we have to tread very carefully. If the market should collapse and property prices should plunge, the government does not have the capacity to bring prices back up to a steady level. We've seen that in 2002, so we have to be very careful. We don't want a wildly fluctuating property market. We want a steady market. And all our measures are aimed at that. Thank you. Mr. Sit-ho. Thank you, President. Just now, the CE told us that the government has demonstrated its sincerity in taking forward constitutional development. But if there are any signs of a government intervening in elections, then it could easily become a precedent of manipulating elections. And if that's the case, the people won't think the government is sincere in rolling forward constitutional development. Now, in the organizing of the by-elections, you're doing a lot of things, like you allow people not to take away their advertisement boards, and then there are no appeals in publicity materials for people to vote, and even now you won't tell people whether you're going to cast your vote. Many civil servants are concerned. they're worried that once they walk into the ballot station, the polling station, they could be stigmatized and it could be used as evidence against them in future. So there is this white terror over our heads. So you have to clear the air. Can you tell us whether you're going to vote on the 16th of May? Have you explicitly or implicitly asked your subordinates not to vote? Now, it's everyone's decision whether he chooses to vote or not. There's no question of pressure from the chief executive. And I haven't decided whether I'll vote on the 16th of May. If the CE would not make that clear today, his act alone could influence the partiality of the election. Now, you are unwilling to give an answer today. Is it because you want to show your loyalty to the Beijing, and then you are relinquishing on your rights to vote and obligations to vote? I have nothing to add. Mr. Paul Chen, Chief. Thank you. Chief Executive, when you ran for election in 2007, you said that within your term, the profits tax rate and the standard salaries tax rate would be lowered. For the former, it would be lowered to 15%. So that's the lowest level in the mid-60s. In your policy address 2007 to 8, you took the first step for profits tax and salaries tax. The rate has gone down by 1% each, and there's a foregone revenue of $5 billion. Now, recently there have been statistics show that in the past 10 years, the GDP may have gone up by 30%, but for the lowest 30 percentile in the working population, then income has dropped in some cases by 30%. So my question is, would you first address the question of resources allocation and address the wealth gap in Hong Kong and also the problem of working poverty in Hong Kong? Would you undertake that for the poor in our community, the old and infirm, before they see substantial improvement in their livelihood, you would no longer reduce tax? Chief Executive, well, my pledge for tax reduction is a solemn one, and we're moving in that direction. And we can see that in the past few years, we've been able to maintain steady economic performance. One reason is because we're able to attract foreign capital to invest in Hong Kong. So even in the phase of the global financial tsunami, we were able to stand on our feet. So that's a fact that such a measure has helped. But then, of course, in special circumstances, we should perhaps invest, put in more for the disadvantaged. And you can see in the budget every year we are doing a lot in this respect. In the past few years, or in the past year or two, in the budget we have announced various expenditure items, and they all add up to $310 billion. That's a substantial increase from the time when I was, before I was the CE. This year we're going to keep a deficit budget so that we could spend more on the grassroots sector. So on the one hand, we want to maintain the vibrancy of our economy. On the other, we are not going to lose sight of the economic, financial pressure on the disadvantaged. Mr. Paul Chen, now I'm not asking you to go back on your pledge. I'm just saying you should move with the times. Now you mentioned that you have rolled out various measures to help the poor. But then when the budget was announced, there was this criticism that you were being miserly. Well, this year you spent an extra $3 billion or so. It's a little better last year or two. You just spent another $2 billion or more. So can you make this pledge in the coming few years for the old, infirm, the people with disabilities and the disadvantaged? You will have new measures to help them?
Yes, we'll be updating our measures all the time in response to the needs of the community, whether we're talking about minimum wage, the weak, the infirm, the disabled, the elderly. If necessary, we will take out focused measures, and this will be done within our financial means. In recent years, despite the occurrence of a deficit budget, we have maintained our level of commitment. Mr. Chen Kwok-chi. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to pick up on the point made by Mr. Chen concerning the wealth gap. I think things are getting really bad. In year 2006, the Gini coefficient was 0.533. In this year's budget, the FS had handed out sweeteners up to $10 billion. I call it the handing out of sweeteners because they're available to all walks of life. But I don't think the grassroots are able to be lifted out of poverty. See, in the rest of your term, are you going to have something more long-term, something more focused and targeted at the vulnerable, taking care of both the district needs as well as the territory at large, so that the grassroots will be lifted out of poverty? Thank you. See, in Hong Kong, I think the most important point is about poverty eradication. I think our focus should be on education. That's most important. In this way, we can enhance social mobility. That's very important. In this way, we can prevent intergenerational poverty. Education can eradicate this particular phenomenon so that if you are poor today, you won't remain poor in the future. We have a very positive immigration policy. We have 115 new arrivals on a daily basis. They are mainly the grassroots. They don't have any special skills, and they are not in a good bargaining position, and therefore they receive low wages, and in the beginning they have to experience hardship in their livelihood. But then we have social welfare, and we have also got investment in education, and as a result they're able to experience social mobility, and they can lead a dignified life, and they can also earn enough to maintain their living. Now, a word on the Gini coefficient. If you just look at the broad figure, you can see that it is 0.5. But then if you look at the investment in education, commitments in housing and other services, in fact, for this year 2006, it is only 0.427, more or less the same for the year 2001. I'm not saying that this is a low figure. It is also on the high side. But then given this city economy, and in particular, as Hong Kong, as a financial center, you will have people earning a lot, and also others who are new arrivals, and they do have a very big gap in terms of the income levels. So what we're doing is that for the poor, we try to help them, like giving them a roof over their head, allowing them to be able to seek a job, and we've also invested heavily in education. In terms of healthcare, social services, etc., they account for 56% of the public expenditure. So we will never lose sight of our duties in this regard. And then for social mobility, I'm sure you have already seen that for every 10 years, we'll try to have a census to see if there is any improvement in the livelihood. According to our statistics, for the first 10 years, starting in the year 1996 all the way up to 2005, for those 10 years, according to our statistics, the mobility has been 29%. In other words, 29% of the community have been able to move up the social ladder. And then in another 10 years' time, I understand that the mobility rate has been raised to 33%. In other words, as a result of our social policies and our budgetary measures as well as other initiatives, mobility is improving. I'm not being complacent. Yes, we need to work hard. We'll continue with our work, but we very much hope that our policies will win your support, while at the same time they are affordable as far as our public finances are concerned. Mr. Zhang, I think Mr. Zhang has misunderstood my question. My main focus isn't really on social mobility, though it is related to my question. I am concerned about the case of the poor. I don't think our policies are focused on solving the problems of poverty. I think it will be difficult for the CE to give us something very concrete today. Mr. Zhang, are you going to appoint a number of directors of bureaus to set up a working group or a higher level council or committee so as to address the issue of poverty? I don't think we should just look at the concepts. I think we need to find concrete measures to help the 1 million or so people who are living in poverty to be lifted out of poverty. Can you give us something more solid? Well, there are criticisms saying that we have just got too many committees or councils for social services, we have SWAC and others. So if you have something more specific, please tell us. In relation to the broad issue of wealth gap, well, I don't think there is any capitalist economy that can control the problem. Some communist economies have tried to do this, but they haven't got the popular support. So if you have a very specific proposal, please tell us. We'll be more than happy to consider it. Mr. Wong Kwok Kin. Thank you, Mr. President. Just now, the CG talked about the housing market and the house prices. I don't think we should just look at the property prices. Some people, in the light of the rising property prices, have increased the rental levels, and so many people are having difficulties. We have the sandwiched class. They are not able to afford a home in the private market. They are not eligible for public housing. And for a three-person household, the income limit would be $14,000. If you earn $20,000, I think it's a matter of home ownership. So the government admits that for anybody or any family earning $20,000 only, they can't really afford a home in the private market. So if they have to pay rent for their flat, it has become a heavy burden. I don't think I can agree with the administration that everybody is asking for his or her own home. We are talking about 80,000 such families. They do have a housing problem. I just want to know what measures will be available to help them. The CE has just said that there will be a consultation. I'm not querying the consultation. The government has promised us a lot of consultation exercises, but sometimes some of them do not generate in any results, like the transport subsidy scheme and the abolition of the residence rule for the OH allowance. I'm afraid that this consultation on housing will drag on for a long time. But in the interim, I want to know whether there are any provisional measures or interim measures to help the sandwich class to solve their housing problem and ease them of the heavy burden.
Chief Executive, I've made one point very clear. Mr. Wong, I said the consultation would last 5 months, and I hope that in my policy address in October I'm able to give a conclusion, and if there's a need to adjust our policies, I will put forward my concrete proposals. But what is important is that we have a consensus. If we're looking at rental units, yes, we are closely monitoring the rental movements. We want to see how much people have to pay to rent a place, especially talking about the general households, not people in subsidized housing. I'm talking about people in the private market. How much do they have to pay in rent to meet their housing needs? We have surveys on that. I think at the moment there are about 40%. The rental accounts for about 40% of income, and is not historical high, and is at an acceptable level. But of course, there may be cases that warrant consideration. That's why I said we need to do consultation. And I can tell you this, Mr. Wong, we're going to do an extensive consultation. We'll be very careful. We'll keep an open mind. We would like to listen to different views, but it's important that we strike the right balance. And we need to address many issues first. And if we are to do it, we need to consider the commitment. We need to consider land, the money, and so on. But I think most important of all is we have to first think through whether the government has a duty or should use public money to help people buy their homes. That's important. And if we should do it, where do we draw the line? A few months is not a long time. And in this chamber, already I have made a solemn pledge. I'm going to do it. Mr. Wong, I'm not questioning your consultation, Chief Executive. Yes, after consultation, you may have to find land and start building and so on. Maybe we'll only see the results a number of years later. So what I asked you earlier is whether you have considered any short-term measures to help those already in difficulties. For example, adjusting upward the income limit for public rental housing. So for those who are not too much above the income limit could also be eligible for public housing. This will help to address their housing needs. Have you considered such a measure? On the eligibility criteria for public rental housing, the Housing Authority keeps conducting reviews. I'm sure if there's a need, they will certainly consider this. Thank you. Dr. Joseph Lee. Chief Executive, just now in response to Mr. Wong Kwok Kin's question, you said you would consider the sandwich class. It's true there are many people who are not able to buy homes, but they can rent. They cannot rent a home as well. These are people earning, say, $20,000 to $25,000 a month. There are some 170,000 people like this. They are not able to rent a place because they're not given protection anymore after the lifting of the rent control. So I want you to do something, but I'm not going to ask about this really. I'm just saying that you have to also bear in mind this group of people who are not able to rent a place because of the lifting of the rent control. And anyway, there are many young people up there. They are our future pillars. Now there is a working holiday scheme for young people. Young people can travel abroad for to get an experience or to work. There are only just 6 countries like Australia, New Zealand, Ireland, Canada, Japan, Germany. So there are only just 6 countries. Perhaps it's not enough. Would you perhaps consider signing cooperation agreements with all countries, with more countries, and then you could also increase the quota so more young people are able to benefit from an overseas work or living experience? That's a good suggestion. I will follow up on that. Dr. Lee, thank you for following up, Chief Executive, but I hope you will give us concrete answers as to whether you will sign agreements with more countries. What I'm saying is that I said this is a good idea. I will certainly follow up on it and do it. Thank you then, Chief Executive. Professor Patrick Lau. Chief Executive, I was going to ask about the housing issue, but perhaps there's another issue that deserves your attention. The Tsinghua College case has sparked much concern, and of course you've done a lot in drug addiction treatment. I've visited a number of drug addiction treatment centers, and I've visited displays, and there are many young people staying in these centers, but these young people are in the age group that they should be receiving education, but currently there is not a proper policy in place, so young people could receive education while they're receiving drug treatment. The Secretary for Education discussed this matter with us before. I wonder if you will consider how you might help these young people. So while they are receiving drug addiction treatment, they could also receive formal education that they're entitled to. Chief Executive. Yes, of course, if it's just a short treatment program, there could be tutorial classes for them. But if they are going to stay there for a long time, most definitely we want to make special arrangement. Now, the bone of contention is where do we draw the line? Should the stay be more than 1 school term or several terms? Or if it's like the case of the Tsinghua College, people stay there several years, then, well, of course, there are different ways for drug treatment. So actually, we're in discussion with Tsinghua College to see how we could help Tsinghua address this issue. But of course, you know, there are a number of problems plaguing the Tsinghua College. We must first sort out their books properly, and then we'll see what we can do in future to come up with a proper solution. But we share your thinking. For any young people at the school age, if they're going to stay in a drug treatment center for a long time, say for more than a school term, then we must do as much as we could to help them receive education so that when they complete their treatment program, they could switch to normal schools. Professor Lau? Now, I see some teachers actually have to travel to the treatment centers. You mean what teachers? Oh, sorry, sir, I heard you wrong. Okay, teachers. Teachers, I'm talking about teachers. Secondary school or primary school teachers. You know, they have to travel to the center to give classes and give assistance to these young people. So is there a policy to subsidize these teachers in going to these centers? Because you did mention tutorial classes. Right now, there is not a clear policy. Well, there are different drug treatment methods now. Some are involve short-term stays. Some involve people staying at home. And if they have to stay in the center, we give them psychological counseling and other assistances. And if the people stay in school, but if they have to leave school, then we give them tutorial classes as far as we could. If it's just a short-term stay, it won't be a major problem. We can give them tutorial classes say for 2 or 3 months, and then they go back to school again. But if it's long-term stay, like in the case of Xinjiang College, we'll have to see what special arrangement could be made. We are more than happy to do something here. If there could be proof that there is this long-term need, and there's need for drug treatment for more than a school term, then we'll see what arrangements we could make. We could give them qualified teachers to teach them the different subjects, and after drug treatment, then they could go back to mainstream schools. That's already what we are doing, and there are already such arrangements in place. As to whether it's sufficient, then can we have a whole school setting there with a whole team of teachers? Then, of course, that's a different matter because we need to arrange the resources. In any case, if perhaps we need special training too for teachers teaching in these treatment centers. Dr. Paul there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, there was an opinion poll conducted by the Chinese University. 25% supported radical actions to be taken, and there's a danger of riots in Hong Kong, is even said. Last year, on the question of increasing the old age allowance, at one of the chief executive's question and answer session, some members threw bananas at the chief executive. Yes, because of the hesitant attitude of the government, some people are unhappy about it. Now, I was at that session. I observed the response of the reaction of the chief executive. Well, the chief executive always showed his emotions, and you did put up a stern face for a minute. But then afterwards, many people said that it was because of the drastic action taken by someone. That's why the government changed its policy. And some even said openly in a forum that it's because of his action. The government eventually increased the OA. I think that's the biggest fraud in the century. It's a political fraud. Because it gives the people the impression that we have to resort to drastic action for us to get anything. So I want to get it from the horse's mouth. Now, what were the reasons for the government to change its position on OA? How come you increased the OA so nobody could take credit for that? Thank you.
Hong Kong is a pluralistic society, so it is only natural that we have different views. I think when we have an open debate, sometimes we get very heated in the argument. You may get the feeling that there is disharmony, but I'm sure the public can tell what exactly it is about. Just now you referred to the public opinion polls. Citizens have been asked whether it is better to have consensus or negotiation. I think it is very clear that they prefer that in relation to all sorts of issues. As to what happened in this chamber, I've already addressed that issue, and I've always said that we shouldn't resort to violent means. We should be calm-headed, we should be rational in our discussion. Yes, sometimes there might be some violent acts, and I think you would tolerate me if I put up a stern face. In relation to the question of the OAA, at that time, I thought that I was being most logical. The OAA should be given to those elders who have a special need. But then at the time, I haven't got the support of the community, in particular, the support of the two major political parties in this chamber. In particular, one of them, that is the DAB, who has always been in support of the mainstream ideas, and the Democratic Party also didn't support me, so I was influenced by them, and there was a new proposal, and then that was endorsed by the administration. It was as simple as that, Mr. Paul Chair. But recently, and I've referred to the CU Hong Kong's opinion polls. And in fact, we have seen more acts of violence. Even for the City Forum, we have to put up something like the Berlin Wall. And just a few days ago, there was violence in Macau, not to mention the red shirts in Thailand. So things are getting worse. I want to know whether the administration has got any measures to do the following. That is, to carry out a survey, you take out some preventive measures, so that we can arrest the trend. Do you have any measures to cope with such a trend? Mr. Chair, as I have said, this is an open society. We try to be tolerant when we enforce the law, but then everything must be done within the bounds of the laws. It doesn't matter if we have marches and demonstrations. Since the handover, I think on average we have 6.7 marches per day. It doesn't matter. But once you resort to violence, you won't get the support of the public. Say, for example, when there is bodily contact between the policemen and the protesters, and when there is violence, then of course we have to enforce the law, and this is what the public expect us to do. As to the behavior within this chamber, I think it is up to you legislators to take action jointly instead of us. I think it is for you to maintain the dignity here and to enforce the rules of procedures here. I'm sure this is the expectation of the public. Mr. Lewington. Mr. President, the Chief Executive comes here to address the issue of the house prices. I think in the world we have the highest house prices, and for our mortgage burden, this is also very high in the world scale. Chief Executive, all along you have been adopting the policy of big market, small government. I want to know whether as a result of such a policy, property developers have influenced or decided on the market forces. I think it is approaching monopoly. 80% or 82% of those surveyed by the DP have said that they would like to see the relaunch of the HOS program. For Ni Ka-shing of Cheung Kong and the Kwok brothers of the Sun Hung Kai and other property developers, do they have different views? And so you say that the society is divided on this matter. Are you actually the person to be blamed in relation to the denial or of the relaunching of the HOS program? I think all along the government has been very positive in our response. In fact, we still have a very active public housing program. We want to make sure that people have a place to live in, and the waiting time for public housing is only 3 years. So generally speaking, Mr. Lee, in Hong Kong, we have about 2.3 million households in Hong Kong, and we have 2.5 million flats. Generally speaking, everybody will be entitled to a roof over his head. But then when it comes to home purchase, then there is another question. I think we've gone through the Asian financial turmoil. We've learned a lesson. And at that time, there was a very solemn policy review. We laid down our policies. We had the support of the public. Today, we've seen some changes in the market, and we've responded to the changes in the market. Say, for example, we have prevented speculative measures, and we have also prevented the propping up of the markets artificially. So I think what you were trying to say is something that I am aware of. And if somebody has an income level or asset level which exceeds the eligibility criteria of public housing, and if they want to become a homeowner, they may find that they lack the financial means to go up the housing ladder. People have asked this question, that is whether the government should help them. I've already said that we need to discuss this matter. For our housing and land policy, we'll never have the hands-free policy, we'll never have a laissez-faire policy. We have taken the lead, and we have a quantitative and rigid policy in the past. We did have a sort of quota-like policy, but then the results were not satisfactory. In the past, we tried something, and we found that there was a problem. Now, if we change again and go back to what we did in the past, then I'm sure we have to think about it. And we're talking about a consultation period of 5 months only. It is not a long time. We need to act responsibly. Mr. President, the CEO was talking about the 2002 housing policy review. Property developers gave you pressure, and Mr. Michael Shin set out a number of measures. And in fact, Mr. Stanley Ho was also responding to the policies. Now, we used to have the long-term housing policy, talking about the supply of land and also supply of units. But after 2003, there was no policy at all. You learned this from Sichtong cleverly. You scrapped the policy. There was no longer any housing targets, and you never consulted the public. And it was only last month TSANG disclosed this. Mr. Zhang, why have you chosen this as the policy to learn from Mr. Sichtong? Now, of course, we know that we used to have the long-term housing strategy, LTSHS. For this strategy, you have scrapped it without making an announcement. Are you trying to hide something from us in relation to land supply? Are you hiding from us the fact that all along you have been accommodating the aspirations of the property developers in this regard? CE. We made a very clear announcement in relation to the suspension of the HOS program. At that time, the housing prices were such that they were affordable. And so the government did not have to be the developer anymore. It isn't something hidden from the public. It wasn't done secretly. It was done openly. And everybody knows the rationale. At that time, nobody objected to that. The property prices fell by 60%. Don't forget that at that time, we changed our policy. We stopped the construction of HOS flats. The main reason wasn't because the property developers asked us to do so. The main reason being that there were many cases of negative assets. And in fact, that was heartbreaking for us administrators. And in fact, when somebody buys a home and he can't afford the mortgage repayment and the property becomes a negative asset, it would only result in grievance, and that happened in the year 2003. So we haven't, and we shouldn't, sort of confuse the sequence.
Mr. Yip Kok Him. Thank you, Mr. President. Just now, some members mentioned the Chinese university poll survey in February. The poll found that over 20% of the people in Hong Kong believed there was a lack of harmony in Hong Kong. So there's a drop of 11% compared to 2006 to 8. So many scholars studied this report. They try to interpret it, the report, and the interpretation is that the wealth gap is a primary reason for the social discord. Now, of course, just now been talking about soaring property prices, increase in fares and tariffs of public utilities, prices are going up, and income couldn't catch up. So, of course, there's widening wealth gap. If we don't do anything to reverse this situation, definitely there could be problems with social harmony. So, in the face of this plight, what can government do to reverse the worsening trend? Chief Executive, as I said, we have an open capitalist society. We have a positive, proactive immigration policy. Now, we are primarily a financial center, so people who have the highest earning power may choose to come and live in Hong Kong. And because we have the new arrival scheme, every year we have also the poorest people coming to Hong Kong, so that's the reason for the gap. What is most important is how we could promote upward mobility. That's the responsibility of the government. If we rely on government policies and funding sources alone to deal with the question of uneven distribution of income, or I'm sure that may spark a debate in the community. I'm not saying we don't need to, we are not doing anything, but we need to have consensus in the community before we can do anything. That we are an open society. We come to the truth through debate. Now, very often we may see bickering and disharmony, but actually we can see we are a society based on rule of law. People like us to abide by the law. So on the one hand, while we're striving for the truth, we must not resort to radical means. Some say that we could do more. But then in the same survey, what you can see is this. There are about 80% of those surveyed says that when it comes to fighting for personal rights, we shouldn't resort to violence. That's in the same survey. And 70.1% also say that we shouldn't resort to violent means in fighting for public interest. So people resent violence. We believe we ought to abide by the law and adopt a reasonable means in fighting for rights. So this is our strength, actually. As I said, every day we have on average 6.7 marches per day for different causes: animal rights, constitutional development, anything. So that's the way we can express ourselves. And I'm sure we'll have marches now and in future on universal suffrage, on anything. Even if we have universal suffrage, you'll see we'll have this. And so this is what an open society will have. But on the question of the poverty gap, indeed, it is a serious issue. So what are we going to do? As the government, we are spending on education. We are plowing in public resources on education, healthcare, housing, welfare services. So we try to steer investment towards these services, these sectors. That's the policy we adopt. And at the same time, we must not underestimate our social mobility. You can't say that people who are poor today, they'll remain poor after 10 years. No, it's not the case. I showed you the figures just now that we do have upward mobility. So the government must still keep up our work. And for the disadvantaged, the government must do our best to help them. Now, we have limited financial means, but whatever means we have, we should divert them to this cause. You can tell in the past few years, since we've been hit by the financial tsunami, you know where we are spending our money. You've seen it. We have adopted targeted approach to help the grassroots. As we're not just doing it now, we're doing it and on an ongoing basis. And of course, while we strive for harmony, we must also have rational debates. We talk about whether we should resort to radical means, whether we should hold things. Of course, no, that would be counterproductive. If we could have calm and rational debates, I'm sure we will be able to find solutions. At the same time, public will believe this is a responsible way to deal with issues. And this is also a way for us to actually address problems in Hong Kong. Now we need mutual accommodation to have social harmony. But then in a society like Hong Kong, a wealth gap is a sure phenomenon. Now, just now I cited some figures. If we look at income, of course, the gap is big. So if we add social wage to that equation, you'll see the gap is much narrow. So it's not so bad, but still I believe we have to do more. For the disadvantaged, they are the biggest group that government must help, and we will continue to help them. Mr. Yip Kok Him. I agree with the Chief Executive on radical or violent means. Yes, Hong Kong people cannot accept that. But when I talk about my concern about harmony, it's not just about such means. I'm talking about the economy and those with low income. And we are seeing inflation hovering above us. So what can we do to make sure that we won't have this harmony of this nature? Now, for things that are within our control, like increase in fees and tariffs of public utilities, we will make sure the increase is gradual. So whatever we can that are within our control, we'll do something, and we'll make sure that the increase in such fees won't will rise with wages, and we want to make sure the rises are mild. Now this year, as our economy recovers, we try to make sure that inflation won't be too bad, and then we have higher GDP growth and inflation growth. That's what we aim to achieve. And if that's the case, then there will be more wealth among the people, and then we also see improvement in income to the low-income groups. The government also has other measures in place. You know, we're actively considering a minimum wage. It's hoped that before the summer recess this year, we are able to come up with a concrete proposal. And on other measures to improve people's livelihood, we will continue to consider these measures. So this is a question of us working together. We need to do work, and we would like members to help us consider these issues as well, because we have common goals. Mr. Chin Pui Chung. Mr. President, the CE openly stated his wish for better relationship between the executive and the legislature. With fewer members in this chamber, it's true there is a better relationship, and SARG is more at ease, but then we cannot expect that to last. My question is this. Recently, this council passed by majority, almost it was 33-1, asking the government to put in place a policy to restrict and regulate the sale of uncompleted flats. So there is a majority support here. What measure would you come up with in response to the majority wish of this council? I hope you won't just come up with those things like the 9 measures and so on. I hope you will give a pledge to protect the interests of the public, so that legislators could work better with the executive as well.
We are grateful to the legislature in relation to the speculation in the property market and in relation to the manipulation in the property market in our counter measures. I think you agree with us on this matter. We hope to come up with something quicker in terms of the response. It takes more time to legislate. We're talking about months or even a year's time. But then for our measures, we want them to become effective in a month or two. When they become effective, when they generate results, then we have to consider whether we still need a piece of legislation. I think it is only when we have to close certain loopholes, then we will still need a piece of legislation by then. As of now, we have been talking to the REDA, the Real Estate Developers Association. I hope that on this occasion they will be as positive in the response as they have been so in the past. And we hope that the speculation will not be affecting investment of the citizens, especially speculation arising from manipulative acts. We haven't ruled out legislative work. We can do it on two fronts. First of all, we'll try to see if administrative measures can yield some effects. But of course, we aren't just relying on administrative means. We have already got a statutory tool. That is, for the sale of uncompleted flats, you need an approval, and they will be subject to conditions. So our proposals will be incorporated into the scheme for the sale of uncompleted flats. If the administrative measures are not to be followed, we can always put a halt on the sale of the uncompleted flats. Therefore, we have already got sufficient legislative effect to deal with this problem. But once again, I would like to thank you for your support. If necessary, we'll introduce legislation. Mr. Jim. So we have got it loud and clear from the CE. But at the same time, I hope that the CE will respect the wish of the legislature. Please improve the relationship between the legislature and the executive. If we have all got the aspiration to do this, why don't you legislate for it? I'm glad to see that the Democratic Party is supporting your proposal. Mr. Frederick Fung. I will certainly respect the views of the legislature. I think I have to point out that you share the same view as I. Sometimes you don't need to go overboard. As long as it is effective, it will suffice. What is most important is that we are doing what the people want us to do. Mr. Frederick Fung, the CE said that the Gini coefficient was 0.533, but then with social wage and other things, it is actually 0.42% when he talked about the wealth gap. In the case of the United Kingdom, before the social wage account is taken into account, it was 0.51, and after that 0.37 being the Gini coefficient. So we're talking about different yardsticks. When we have the Gini coefficient of 0.533%, it means that we have gone beyond the warning threshold, which is 0.5. If you take into account the social wage, the critical line will be 0.4. So in the case of UK, after social wage is taken into account, they don't have a problem, but we are still having a problem. I just want to point out that the two yardsticks are different, but that's not my question, Mr. CE. When it comes to political issues, when it comes to constitutional development, communication will be important. Otherwise, we can't resolve the problem. But dialogue doesn't mean that we are giving up our principles, but then with communication we can at least remove unnecessary misunderstanding. Now, for the 13 groups that form the Alliance for Universal Suffrage, on the question of political development, we have had discussion and communication with different groups. Even groups with different views from us. We have talked to the CS4A, but at the same time, we would like to meet with the Central People's Authority, say, for example, the liaison office, as well as the officials from the CPG responsible for Hong Kong affairs. We've been working through the NPCSC. We've been working through the secretaries of the government. But as of now, we have been told that there hasn't been a reply from the authorities up there. I just want to know if the CE can help us on the matter of communication. CE, first of all, yes, let me talk about the case of the UK. Yes, when the social wage is taken into account, then the Gini coefficient becomes another sort of figure. But I don't think anybody in Hong Kong would like to follow the footsteps of the UK. The tax rate is on the high side and many banks have to be taken over. So you need to pay a price to follow the UK model. Now back to the question of the political development. Yes, we all agree to have more communication. Secretaries and directors of bureaus all want to have dialogue with all quarters of life. We'll try to listen to as many as possible. I think we have to bear the great, we need to play our role, but then the decision will rest in Hong Kong. The main one will take place in Hong Kong. In my opening remarks, I've already made it clear. The central authorities have already done their part. It is now up to us to determine whether we'd like to make the step forward. They can't help us in this regard. They have already made one step forward. It is now up to us to see whether we want to play our role and take a step forward. If we want to roll forward political development, we have to ask ourselves, for the constitutional setup, we need the cooperation of the three parties. So whether we can make it, it depends on our ability to compromise, to listen to others, to respect the others' views. If we insist on our own views, it will be difficult to achieve anything. Even the central authorities cannot help us. What is more important is that we need to ask ourselves this question on this matter. We have been arguing about this for 20 years. The society is very much divided over this matter. If we want to have something which satisfies everybody, we won't be able to do this overnight. We need to look at the political reality. We have to take steps one by one. If we are to take a dramatic action, we won't get the agreement of the three parties. It doesn't take one to force it through. Not the central authorities, not us alone, not the government alone. I think we need all parties to join hands before we can have a good result. So, Mr. Fong, I understand the communication is important. I will continue with that. I will continue with my heart efforts. But don't forget that on this occasion, the responsibility lies on our shoulder. And for the 2012 package, please compare it with our existing setup, whether it is more democratic, be honest. And I think the citizens have already made a decision. It is now our duty to do something. Don't just insist on achieving your own targets. I think it is a matter of 20 years, and I don't think it will take just one single step to achieve the goal. We can only move forward step by step. The gradual and orderly progress is necessary because of this, because there has been division for 20 years. We can't try to rush. I think this is the most important and serious political reality that we have to live with. I don't know if the CE has read the proposals from the Alliance for Universal Suffrage. We are also talking about gradual progress, and we aren't talking about dramatic and one-step only progress. I have yet to have a discussion with the CE. I hope he will find time to meet with me and have a detailed discussion. But then, according to the 27 decision and the basic law, we have to go through a 5-step mechanism. And then you talked about three parties, the CE, the LegCo, as well as the Central People's Government. We have talked to the CS4A, but I would also like to talk to the CE. What about the third party, that is the CPG? Can we not also have them joining us in the talks? Even if we can't agree on everything, we can at least remove the unnecessary misunderstanding. Now, for the CS4A, as well as the MPCSC members, the MPC deputies, they have already agreed to reflect our wish. What about the CE? Can we not also help us and give it a push so that we can achieve our aim? You don't need to worry. I will certainly try to do this. Anything that facilitates the passage of the 2012 package by the LegCo, I will do it. But don't forget that the responsibility lies with us in this chamber. The people have already spoken. The central authorities have already spoken. The package has been announced, and it is within the 2007 MPCSC decision. That's the maximum we can get within that framework. And in fact, as Mr. Lam has already said, we can have a lot of flexibility at the level of domestic legislation. We have already strived for the maximum within the framework. First of all, we need to take the first step about the 2012 package, and with a boost in confidence on all sides, the second step will be easier. I don't want to repeat my opening remarks, Recently, I've been doing a lot of soul searching. What is lacking? Probably courage on our part, and also tolerance on our part, and accommodation on our part. It is time for us to have courage in this matter.
Mr. Lau Kong-Wang. Mr. President, in the past few years, we saw a few firemen killed in duty, and it's most sad. So there is public concern about the upgrading of fire service equipment and training of firemen. A few days ago, there was a forum. Some colleagues, there was a panel meeting, and some fire services colleagues came to give us information that we didn't know about before. For example, many of the operation manuals were not translated into Chinese. And then there is also a problem of switching over to new equipments, etc. So there are various problems that could pose a threat to the safety of firemen and also to the lives and property of the public. So some members suggested the efficiency unit to look into this. Perhaps there should even be a comprehensive review of the structure and management of the fire services department. And perhaps they could also deploy more manpower to shorten the procurement process and so on. So I wonder if you have any immediate response to these suggestions, Chief Executive. And on industrial buildings, could there be legislation to require the retrofitting of fire services device installation? I agree, firemen put their lives at risk whenever they go on duty. They are most professional. But of course, if there is something to do with the equipment or procedure, we must make sure that we do the best in this regard. We have world-class or first-rate equipment if we pitch ourselves against the world. But of course, we must not be complacent. If we don't do enough in terms of equipment or procedure, most definitely we won't save on such aspects. But of course, we have to be reasonable. We have to convince the Finance Committee that the measures are reasonable. So, Mr. Lau, you could rest assured. When it comes to equipment, in particular, the communications equipment, I talked to the Director of Fire Services several times. That is, when firemen go into a scene, is there any technology available so the exact location of the fireman could be identified? And I was told that there are new technologies, but they're still in the testing stage. Anyway, we have to consider such devices. Now, there's been several rounds of upgrading of their communication devices and equipment. And you see that every year the Secretary for Security comes for funding. We always help out. We won't save in this respect, but of course we must make sure the money is well spent. On training and manpower, we have our system in place. If there's a need, we'll certainly consider other measures. Mr. Lau, the Chief Executive didn't ask my question on legislation for industrial buildings, and also the frontline officers made some suggestions a few days ago. Could you please also look into those? Well, I didn't read about those suggestions, but I'm sure the Secretary for Security will look into them and will certainly do something. Thank you. So don't worry. This on safety of fire services officers, especially our capacity to fight fire, we will certainly make sure we do a proper job. Mr. Sampson, Dr. Sampson Tam. Thank you, Mr. President. Now, some political parties were said to be placing political advertisements on radio, which is against the code. Now, I'm the chairman of the panel on information technology and broadcasting. I've received letters, but there's no investigation, of course. Of course, Ms. Emily Lau is one of the subjects. Now, many in the public have asked whether the current policy is fair and clear. What do you mean by fair? Because the policy was laid down many years ago. At the time, it was a code to regulate the electronic media and ban political advertising. But on newspapers, there are such advertisements every day, and so people query whether it's fair. And then there are also gray areas about what we mean by electronic media. The broadcasting authorities, the definition is that that means radio or television. But then there are also web radios. They are not subject to regulation. So it seems that there's regulation over some but not all electronic media. So there is unfairness as well. That's why people ask whether we should review the policy. Now, why am I so concerned about this? It's not because some of my colleagues may have breached the rule, but rather we're concerned because the chief executive has been proposing that we roll forward in democratic development, and the MPC SC has also said that we could have universal suffrage for electoral election in 2020. So by that time, we need to have established party politics. But now, political parties are subject to constraints in the way they communicate with the public or in publicizing themselves. So is there any conflict in terms of the policy? And would you review the current policy? Mr. James Ho, can I ask the President this? If a member asks questions and then he alleges another member of breaching a rule, I think it's a serious allegation. Now, Dr. Samson Tam named Miss Emily Lau as having breached the rule, but she's not the one who's breached the rule. It's actually commercial radio. Well, Dr. Samson Tam, did you make clear that, did you allege anyone of breaching the rule? Now, I said I've received complaints from the public. They asked us to conduct an investigation into incumbent members about placing advertisements on commercial radio. Well, I don't think that's a departure from the rule. So, Chief Executive, please answer the question. At least shouldn't the clarification be made here, because the allegation has been made. Now, should there be clarification that if it's a breach of the rule is on the part of the commercial radio, not on the member? Could we at least clarify that point? Dr. Samson Tam's question was clear. In the course of putting that question, if members felt that Dr. Tam was alleging another member of having breached the law or rule, then I believe Dr. Tam should give a clarification. No, I'm just saying that, let me clarify then, there's allegation that the commercial radio may have breached the rule. Chief Executive, I understand there are examples overseas. Under the law, political parties may do broadcasting or do political advertising, especially during an election campaign. But then in Hong Kong, we differ from many countries in many ways, especially in terms of the electoral laws. Now, in Hong Kong, we attach great importance to fairness and also clean election. There is also a cap on election expenses. If we allow political parties to, if we allow political advertisement, it may undermine the fairness and impartiality of elections. That's why we have strict codes under the Broadcasting Authority. That is, it doesn't matter if it's an independent person or a person with political affiliation, there must not be any preferential treatment for any such person during an election, and there is no plan to change the arrangement. Dr. Tam, well, there is unfairness and there are gray areas in relation to the electronic media. Can I ask the Chief Executive to respond, please? On gray areas, I understand complaints have been lodged with the Broadcasting Authority. I'm sure there will be follow-up on the matter, so I'm not at liberty to say more on that now. I'm sure there will be a way out, and there will be conclusion drawn after investigation. at the moment, I suppose people of Hong Kong still do not want to see substantial changes in the system. So we have no plan to do so. Now, for all members who've only asked questions once before, have had a chance to ask questions today. So that's the end of the session. Please stand as the Chief Executive leaves the chamber. I now adjourn the Council until 11 a.m. on Wednesday, 12th of May 2010.